Good day everyone! So welcome to Disaster Readiness and Risk Reduction. Ayan, so itong subject na to will help us to cope up with disasters, to become prepared and become responsive kapag nagkaroon ng mga disasters sa ating mga locations. Okay, so we are going to discuss first a disaster. Okay, what is a disaster? Yan. According to the United Nations Office of Disaster Risk Reduction or UNISDR, it is a serious disruption of the functioning of a community or a society, causing widespread human, material, economic, and environmental losses and impact which exceeds the ability of the affected community or society to cope using its own resources. Meron tayong 3 points dito para masabi natin na ang disaster ay isang disaster. First, we have serious disruption. Ayan, serious disruption ng functioning ng ating community. Okay? So, kapag ang isang event, isang phenomenon, nag-cause ng serious destruction sa community, okay, pwede na natin siyang, na-achieve niya na yung isang qualification na masabi natin na yung phenomenon na yun ay isang disaster. Next, ayan, meron tayong widespread human, okay, material, economic, or environmental losses. Okay? Dahil sa serious disruption na nangyari, okay, yung normal functioning ng community nasira, tapos merong mga nangyaring devastation in terms of material, economic, okay, sa material yung mga buildings nasira, sa economic bumaba yung economy, okay, sa environmental nagkaroon ng destruction sa sa mga habitats ng mga hayop, halaman, mga ganon. At sa human losses naman is kapag may mga namatay or may mga injuries, okay, masasabi natin na isa itong disaster. Okay? And kapag yung impact ng phenomenon na yun nag-exceed sa ability ng society para maka-cope up using its own resources, meaning to say, kapag hindi kinaya ng community ninyo na ang tawag mo na dito na mag-cope up ulit or ma-survive yung nangyaring event, okay, or yung nangyaring disaster, hindi kinaya ng community na kailangan pang humingi ng tulong sa ibang communities, okay, we can categorize that phenomenon as a disaster. Okay, so tatlong key points: serious disruption of the functioning of the community, widespread human, material, economic, or environmental losses, and impacts which exceeds the ability of the affected community to cope using its own resources. Okay? That is an example of disaster. Next, ayan, another definition by the World Health Organization. So, any occurrences that cause damage, ecological disruption, loss of human life, deterioration of health and health services on a scale sufficient to warrant an extraordinary response, okay, from the outside the affected community or the area. Okay, parang same lang siya sa definition nung isa, pero nire-word lang nila. Okay, so parang sinabi niya dito damage and ecological disruption. That is the material and environmental losses. Ito rin, human losses. Ayan. Human losses ang deterioration of health, pati yung mga health services natin. Okay? Tapos, kailangan ng extraordinary response from the outside of the affected community or area because hindi na kaya nung affected community na mag-cope up using their own resources. Kaya kailangan nilang humingi ng tulong sa ibang areas. Okay? So, yun yung definition ng World Health Organization on disaster. Ayan. So, ito yung the pinaka-general definition niya. Ayan. So, galing na rin doon sa UNISDR. Sabi nga natin, serious disruption of the function of a community, widespread human, material, economic, and environmental losses, and impacts which exceeds the ability of the affected community to cope up using its own resources. Okay? Yun yung definition ng disaster. Ayan. So, kung makikita natin dito sa picture na to, okay, they were affected by a typhoon. Okay. Now, makikita natin ang environmental losses as well as material losses. Nasira yung mga bahay, that is a material loss. And then, environmental losses, okay, makikita natin mga puno, mga halaman, and as well as human losses, may mga injuries din dyan. Okay? So, itong event na nasa picture is an example of a disaster. Ayan, isa pa. Example rin to ng material loss. Okay? Kasi, nasira yung building, or I think this is a church, okay? Nasira yung church due to an earthquake, which is a disaster. Ayan. So, ito naman, isang landslide. Okay? So, kung makikita natin, dito na yung sinasabi na kailangan nila ng extraordinary help outside their community because the people affected by the disaster, hindi na nila kayang mag-cope up with the disaster. Kaya kailangan nila ng tulong sa ibang communities. Ayan. Ayan. So, now we are going to talk about the risk factors underlying disaster. What are these risk factors? First, we have severity of exposure. So, from its definition, the amount of exposure to the disaster is highly related to risk of future mental problems. The highest risks are those that have gone through the disaster themselves. Next are those in close contact with the victims. So, severity of exposure, meaning to say, yung naka-experience nung disaster, okay, sila yung may higher risk na magkaroon ng mental health problems. Okay? So, the higher risk ang mga naka-experience or those who have gone through the disasters themselves. Kasi nga, sila yung sila ang may first-hand experience with the disaster. Okay? Naramdaman nila lahat, na-feel nila kung paano humagupit, for example, ng isang bagyo. Okay, gaano kalakas yung hangin, gaano kalakas yung ulan. Okay? Sila yung unang makaka-experience or sila yung may higher risk na maka-experience ng mental health problems. Next are those victims in close contact with them. Okay? Sabihin na lang natin yung nangyaring pagbaha dito sa Cagayan. Like for example, syempre for example yung sa Linao, 'di ba? Binaha sila and so yung mga tao doon sila yung may higher risk na magkaroon ng mental problems. Next, yung mga kapamilya nila na hindi naman masyadong binaha, okay? Like for example, meron siyang kapamilya sa Carig, hindi naman sila binaha doon, okay? Pero naramdaman nila din na parang nakakapanghina kasi yung kapamilya mo nandoon sa may severe na pagbaha. And so sila din magkakaroon din sila ng mental problems kasi nga iniisip rin nila yung nangyari doon sa kapamilya nila. Ayan. So, syempre, yung first na makaka-experience dito, itong mag-ama. Kasi sila yung nandun sa actual disaster. Okay, nandun. Severity of exposure. So, andun sila sa actual disaster na ramdaman nila lahat. So, sila ang may higher risk in the future na magkaroon ng mental health problems. Okay? Ayan. The lower risk with lasting impact are those who only had indirect exposure, such as news of the severe damage. Injury and life threat are the factors that lead most often to mental health problems. Okay. So, lower risk yung mga nakapanood lang ng balita, lower risk yung mga nakarinig lang sa radyo na nagbaha dito sa Cagayan, lalo na yung mga hindi talaga taga Cagayan, okay? Sila yung may lower risk na magkaroon ng mental health problems kasi napanood lang naman nila, narinig lang naman nila sa balita, okay? So, yun. And yung mga factors like injuries and life threat, okay, sila yung number one that that can lead to mental health problems. Okay? So, yan yung sinasabi natin, injury and life threat. Okay? Ayan. So, kapag napanood mo lang naman yung nangyari sa isang certain area, okay? Or nakita mo lang sa social media, well, lower risk ka na magkaroon ng mental health problems in the future. Next, we have gender and family. Almost always, women or girls suffer from more negative effects than boys or men. Disaster recovery is more stressful when children are present in the home. Women with spouses also experience more distress during recovery. Okay, sabi dito, almost, hindi naman lahat, almost always, women or girls suffer more negative effects than men or boys. Why? Because women, okay, they are more emotional. Okay? And so kapag may mga nangyaring disaster, there are tendencies that they can immediately become emotionally unstable. Okay? So, yon. Compared naman sa lalaki, parang often, mas iniisip nila kung paano mag-cope up eh. Mas iniisip nila kung paano natin didiskartehan na bumangon ulit dito sa disaster na to. Okay? Parang rarely ka makakakita ng parang sobrang nanlulumong lalaki because of a disaster. But this is a case-to-case basis. Okay? Depende rin naman yan sa tao. But majority, okay, women suffer more negative effects than men. Okay? Next, disaster recovery is more stressful when children are present in the home. Syempre, bakit? Bakit siya more stressful kapag may mga children? Because iisipin mo na may mga bata na hindi na may tendency ma-traumatize, may mga bata na hindi naman nila kayang for example sa sobrang maliliit nila with their capabilities na din as children, hindi nila kaya rin mag-cope up immediately with the disaster. That's why it's more stressful. Okay? Mahirap makarecover kapag may mga bata. Okay? Lalo na kung yung bata na yun, syempre sabi mong sakitin, or yung bata na yun may mga disabilities na parang or may mental health problem in the first place, mahihirapan na makapag-recover during or after a disaster. Okay? Next, women with spouses also experience more distress during recovery. Okay, women with spouses, lahat ng may mga asawa. Okay? Kasi may tendency na merong miscommunication, merong mga misunderstanding na mangyayari sa mag-asawa that can cause more stress sa mga babae. Sabi na nga natin nung una, they tend to have or to suffer more negative effects yung mga babae. Tapos may misunderstanding pa sila nung asawa niya. Okay? So mas mahirap makapag-recover. Okay? Lalo na tapos meron pa mga bata. Okay? So mas mahirap na 'yon. Nagpatong-patong na. That's why mahirap makapag-recover. Okay? Next. Ayan. Having a family member in the home who is extremely distressed is related to more stress to everyone. Ayan. Having a family member na extremely distressed na siya. Okay? So nakakahawa. Nahahawa ang lahat. Nahahawa ang lahat. Dahil doon sa isang family member nyo na extremely distressed na during or after the disaster. Ayan. It was also found that marital distress has been found to increase after disasters. Okay, sabi nga kanina, marital stress dito sa mag-asawa, okay, mas mag-i-increase siya after the disaster. Kasi nga, may tendency na magkaroon ng miscommunication and all. Kasi may emotional unstable yung isa. Okay? So, mga ganong bagay. Also, conflicts between family members, or lack of support in the home make it harder to recover from disaster. Siyempre, pag nagkaroon na ng conflict dyan, okay, mas may stress yung mga tao, mahirap ka na makarecover. Okay? Na mas iisipin mo pa yung may disaster na nga nangyari, tapos fresh pa na may conflict pa kayo and all. So, it will be difficult for you to recover from disaster, as well as lack of support. Okay? Kung wala kang support system, or if you have a low support system after a disaster, it will be difficult for you to recover because you will think a lot of things, you will overthink a lot of things, okay? So, mahihirapan kang mag-recover after a disaster. Ayan. So, ayan. Kung makikita natin dito sa picture, a mother is always concerned ang mother sa mga family members niya, lalo na sa mga anak niya. So, it will be difficult for her to recover from a disaster if, syempre, namatayan siya, or if nakita niyang depressed yung mga anak niya dahil sa nangyari and all. Tapos, for example, pwede din yung na may fresh na disaster, tapos biglang may away na magkapitbahay, mga ganyang bagay, dahil lumipad yung bubong sa kabila, charot. Or like, yung mga properties and all. Okay, so isang factor yon. Kaya kung makikita natin dito that women are more emotionally stable, or they suffer more negative effects than men. Next, we have age. Ayan. Adults who are in the age which ranges from 40 to 60 are likely to be more distressed after disasters. The thinking is that being in that age range, they have more demands from job and family. O, sabi dito, ranging from 40 to 60, they are more likely to be distressed after disaster. Bakit? Kasi mas marami na daw demands from the job and family. Una, yung mga people under this age range, okay, syempre meron sila mga trabaho, okay, for example, ganon. Tapos nagkaroon ng disaster. Sila yung aasahan ng family to contribute to the recovery, okay? For example, nasira yung bahay. So, syempre sila yung gagawa ng paraan para maghanap ng trabaho, maghanap ng pagkakakitaan, para masustentuan yung bahay, para mapaayos yung bahay, for example. Sila din yung sasandalan ng family, for example, kasi sila yung, if sila yung pinakamatanda doon, if sila yung kumbaga, nakikitang pinaka-support system ng family, sila yung sasandalan ng family, okay? So, those people or those adults under this age range, sila yung more likely to be distressed after a disaster. Sa dami ng kailangan nilang isipin, paano makaka-recover dito, ano mga kailangan bilhin para sa amin after a disaster, pwede ko mai-contribute, paano ko mapapaayos yung mga nasirang properties namin and all, pang-hospital and all. So, yun yung mga iniisip ng mga adults under this age range. Ayan. Research on how children react to natural disasters is limited. In general, children show more severe distress after disasters rather than adults. Higher stress in the parents is related to worse recovery of children. Sabi nila, or according to few researches, distress is often experienced more by children than adults. Bakit? Syempre, okay, they don't know anything about their environment, and nabibigla sila. All they think about is, syempre, happiness, laro, and all. And then, all of a sudden, they would experience a disaster. Okay? So, wala silang kamuang-muang kung ano nangyayari. So, that's why may tendency that they will be traumatized. Okay? Lalo na at, mas mabilis or nagde-develop pa lang ang intellectual capacities or intellectual abilities ng bata, and yung mga experiences that teaches the child, okay, or that give lessons to the child, syempre may stress siya, matotraumatize siya sa mga nangyari, sa mga nakita niya, okay. Like for example, nung bata siya, may nakita siyang, nung nagkaroon sila ng disaster, may nakita siyang namatay and all. So may factor yon. Mas mahihirapan yung bata mag-recover, matotraumatize siya sa mga na-experience niya nun. Okay? Kaya hindi ganun kadali para sa kanya mag-recover after a disaster. Okay? And then, higher stress in the parents, okay, is related to worse recovery of children. Okay? So kapag nakikita ng mga bata that their parents are quarreling because of what happened, because of lack of money, because of financial issues, pati yung pagkain, mga ganung bagay, it will be difficult for children to recover. Mahihirapan na silang mag-recover. Okay? So yun yung impact or so may higher stress na nangyayari sa mga bata. Okay? Yan, like for example, ito, nakikita niya, or kung hindi man niya nakikita, naririnig niya that her parents are quarreling over something. For example, after a disaster. So it will be difficult for her to recover. Ayan, next we have other specific factors of the survivor. Ayan. Several factors related to a survivor's background and resources are important for the recovery from disaster. Recovery is worse if you, number one, were not functioning well before the disaster. If in the first place, prior to the event or prior to the disastrous event, hindi ka na stable or you are emotionally unstable because of, for example, merong financial crisis ka na experience nun, it will be difficult for you to recover. Next, have had no experience dealing with disasters. Okay? For example, it will be your first time to experience such disaster. Like yung, kunyari yung pagbaha. We were not expecting for that na ganun kataas. Yes, na-experience natin magbaha dito sa Cagayan. Pero we were not expecting na hanggang lampas tao or lampas bahay yung baha na yon. So you have no experience with that. Lalo na yung mga bagong generation ngayon. So mahihirapan kang makarecover because of that experience. Next, have to deal with other stressors after the disaster. It will be difficult for you kung after it will be difficult for you to recover kung after ng disaster. Okay, may iniisip ka pa. Like for example, mga pinag-utangan mo, 'di ba? So, ayan na, naniningil na sila. Okay? And then, paano mo sila mababayaran? Meron din na silang property sa'yo, 'di ba? So, that will contribute to parang mahihirapan kang mag-recover because of that. Ayan. Number 4, we have poor self-esteem. Okay? Syempre, kung mababa na yung self-esteem mo sa sarili mo, how will you, anong tawag ito? Paano ka makakahanap ng pag-asa? Okay? To recover if in the first place you have a low or poor self-esteem. Ayan. Feeling of being uncared. Ayan. Dito papasok yung support system. Like, feeling mo you are isolated or you feel like hindi ka belong dito. Okay, may hirapan ka makarecover sa disaster. Like for example, ngayong pandemic. Okay? Ngayong COVID-19 pandemic. Mahirap makarecover kunyari nag-positive ka na nga dun sa virus. And then your support system hindi ka binibigyan ng suporta. Like hindi ka tinutulungan na like bigyan ng food, like yung to boost your immune system, parang pinapabayaan ka lang. Well, it will be difficult for you talaga to recover from that kind of experience. Okay? Yung nag-positive ka na nga tapos parang wala lang silang pakialam. Well, that's it. Hindi mahihirapan ka talaga mag-recover. Next, have little control of the events. Okay? Like for example, hindi natin ina-expect na magkakaroon ng disaster. Pero prepared tayo, like meron tayong mga first aid kit, meron tayong mga na-imbak na pagkain, okay, it will be easier for you to recover. Pero kung hindi ka prepared at all, okay, hindi mo na control na yung, syempre hindi mo naman makakontrol yung event, tapos hindi ka pa nakapag-prepare ng mga gamit pagka na-experience yung event na yon. So, it will be difficult for you to recover. Ayan. Then, lack of capacity to manage stress. Syempre, kapag hindi mo alam mag-manage ng stress, hindi mo alam kung paano mo i-deal yung mga problems after the disaster, well, that will lead you to a difficulty in recovering from that kind of disaster. Ayan, next. Other factors have also been found to predict worse outcomes. Bereavement or death of someone close. Syempre, pag may namatay after that kind of disaster, it will be very, very difficult for you talaga to recover. Syempre, parang nahirapan ka na nga dun sa nangyaring disaster. Ang dami nang nasirang property mo, tapos namatayan ka pa. Diba? So, parang double, ang tawag mo ito? There will be, double problems na encounter mo. Okay? Next, injury to self or another family member or life threat. Okay? Injury to self. Siyempre, iisipin mo kapag, kunyari, nagkaroon ng disaster, tapos may injury ka pa, mahirapan ka mag-recover. Kunyari, bigla kang, dati, hindi ka naman bulag, tapos nabulag ka because of that kind of disaster. Siyempre, may impact yon psychologically on yourself. Kasi, iisipin mo, paano na ako mabubuhay ng ganito? Okay? So, yun. Or, kunyari, sa family member mo, may na-injured doon, syempre isipin mo, paano mo imo-motivate yung tao, or like, syempre may isip mo din na may mga gamot na bibilhin, may mga necessities pa siyang kailangan, or worst case, kailangan nyo pa siyang dalhin sa ospital, marami na namang bills, so that will worsen, okay, your mental problems at mahirapan ka talaga mag-recover. Next is panic, horror, or feelings during the disaster. Ayan, dito na papasok yung trauma. Okay? So, kung during the disaster talaga you were traumatized, mga ganung bagay, na feel mo parang wala na talagang pag-asa, everything was chaotic, lahat-lahat. Okay, it will be difficult for you to recover, okay? So, hindi natin, anong tawag mo na dito? Hindi natin, ma-motivate na yung sarili natin to recover fast kasi nga, palagi mong iniisip yung nangyari during the disaster. Ayan. Next, being separated from family, especially among youth. Okay, lalo na yung mga kabataan, syempre, they are not that independent enough. Okay, tapos, for example, sa nangyaring baha, tapos biglang may inanod. Okay? So, mahihirapan ka mag-recover kasi other than thinking of yourself, syempre isipin mo, asan na kaya yung pamilya ko? Okay? Paano na ako mabuhay nito? Nag-iisa na lang ako. Okay? So, yon. Next, great loss of property. Ito is more on sa mga tao na may mga businesses on properties, on lands, for example, yung sa farming, okay? Lalo na sa farming. Like, malaking impact talaga na biglang na wash out lahat ng mga tanim ninyo. And kung yun lang talaga yung source of income mo, okay, tapos nagkaroon pa ng disaster, and then nasira lahat, it will be difficult for you. Paano ka hahanap ng another source of income? Okay? So, yun yung isang factor para mahirapan ka mag-recover. Next, displacement. Being forced to leave home. Displacement or being forced to leave home. Like, for example, may nangyaring disaster. And then, syempre, kailangan nyo mag-recover eh. Okay? Tapos may isang family member na siya na lang talaga yung inaasahan nyo, siya na lang yung pag-asa nyo, so kailangan niyang pumunta sa ibang place para maghanap ng trabaho, para makatulong sa family dahil sa na-experience na disaster. Okay, yung wala na talagang choice para matulungan yung pamilya niya, kailangan niya talaga maghanap ng trabaho sa ibang place. Yan, isang factor yan para mahirapang makarecover naman yung umalis. Okay? Kasi syempre, isipin niya, kamusta na kaya yung iniwan kong pamilya? Kamusta na kaya sila? Nakarecover na ba sila? Okay na ba sila? Okay? Syempre, tapos iisipin niya pa na naghihirap siyang maghanap ng trabaho and all. So, isang factor yun para mahirapan siyang makarecover. And then, ito, sa developing countries. Okay? Lalo na, isang example natin dito yung Philippines. Okay? Philippines is one of the developing countries. Okay? So, mahirap mag-recover kasi with the limited resources ng Philippines, with the limited facilities, okay? Tapos yung disaster and response ng government officials natin is not that effective and efficient, okay? So, isang factor yun kaya mahirap makarecover ang mga developing countries kasi may mga limited resources lang talaga sila and all. Ayan, next. Ayan. Number 4, we have low or negative social support. Ayan, another risk factor ito. So, the support of others can be both a risk and a resilient factor. Social support can weaken after disasters. This may be due to stress and the need for members of the support network to get on with their own lives. Okay? Siyempre, kunyari meron kang friends, tapos sila support system mo, and then nagkaroon ng disaster, pare-pareho kayo naapektuhan. Okay? May tendency na syempre mag-weaken yung support system mo na friends kasi they are thinking of themselves din. Okay? Iisipin nila yung sarili nila, paano naman ako, paano naman muna kami ng family ko, paano kami magre-recover sa disaster na to. Okay? Hindi nila muna iisipin yung ibang tao, syempre. Or they may think of their friends din, pero syempre, priority pa rin yung sarili nila. So, mag-weaken ng social support after a disaster. Okay? Kasi iniisip nila yung sarili nila. Kasi na-experience din nila yung disaster na na-experience mo din. Okay? Next. Ayan. Sometimes, the responses from others you rely on for support are negative. For example, someone may play down your problems, needs, or pain, or expect you to recover more quickly. This is strongly linked to long-term distress in trauma survivors. Ayan. So, may tendency nga, sabi nga dito na yung mga responses from your support system, they may be negative kasi, yun nga, iniisip nila yung sarili nila, okay, they may turn down your, yung parang paghingi mo ng tulong. Okay? Kasi nga, family first or like self first muna sila. Kasi na-experience din nila yung disaster na yun. Okay? So, yun. At saka, syempre, isipin din nila na, perhaps, mas madaling makarecover to. So, ako muna. Kasi yung feeling nung tao na, baka, syempre, ito, mas malakas yung fighting spirit niya compared sa akin. So, mahihirapan ako talaga mag-recover. So, isipin ko muna yung sarili ko. Mga ganong bagay. Okay? Next. Ayan. So, makikita natin dito sa picture. Ayan. Support system. Okay? Pwedeng, kung sa inyo magpa-family, pwede you can strengthen your support system. Pero, from outside, it will be difficult kasi nga kung pare-pareho kayong naka-experience ng disaster. So, kung makikita natin dito, may mga parang yung sila-sila na lang lapan nagtutulungan as a family muna before helping other people. Okay? Next. Ayan. We are going to talk about the nature and impacts of disaster. Ayan. So, being aware of the nature of hazards and what these can do to people and other elements at risk is the first step in every effort to minimize the effects of disaster. Siyempre, kapag we have the idea, how does this disaster form? How does it work? Okay, we have prior knowledge about it. It will be easier for us to control the event. It will be easier for us to become prepared, okay, for the upcoming disasters. Lessening now the effects of disasters. Ayan. So, disasters are inherently unexpected or come quickly with little or no warning. As a result, disasters that are both man-made and those resulting from natural events cause widespread death, injury, and property damage. Okay? May mga disasters kasi na they come immediately or without any warning. Like for example, like for example, earthquake. We don't know, we cannot detect when will earthquake happen in a certain area, okay? And there are no news, okay, that tells us that there will be an earthquake tomorrow at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, mga ganung bagay. So, mahihirapan tayong mag-cause talaga siya ng widespread damage, injury, and property damage, okay? So, pero may mga disasters din that are detectable, okay? Like for example, yung mga typhoon natin, okay? For example din yung volcanic eruptions, okay? Kapag na-observe talaga yan ng mga authorities, like scientists, okay? Tapos nagbibigay sila sa atin ng mga reports, updates, ganon. So, magiging prepared tayo kung paano to mangyayari. Okay? So, yun. Next. Okay. There is indeed truth to the saying that those which can hurt you are those which you do not see coming. Siyempre, you were not expecting for something. Sila talaga yung magkakaroon ng chance to hurt you. You didn't see that coming because you were not prepared for it. Okay? This underscores the need for timely warnings and quality hazard-related information issued by competent monitoring and warning agencies. Okay? Kaya kailangan nating maging updated sa mga agencies that gives us information on certain disasters. Like for example, Pag-asa, okay, on weather forecasts. Kapag may typhoon, mga ganyang bagay. Kung uulan ba, aaraw, mga ganyang bagay. And then, sa FIVOX, like kapag may volcanic activities, doon sa mga active volcanoes natin in the country, okay, dapat updated din tayo doon. Just in case na sila yung magsasabi if this volcano will erupt soon, mga ganung bagay. Okay, next. Disasters cannot be managed through normal means. This requires immediate and effective intervention of both national government agencies and non-government organizations to help meet the needs of the victims. Okay? Kasi nga sabi natin kanina, based on the definition, that disasters causes severe damage that can cause a wide range of losses, okay, in which the impacts of that disaster exceeds the ability of the community to recover. That's why they need an extra help from outside communities, even government agencies or non-government organizations, in order for that community to recover. Katulad na lang nung nangyari dito recently sa Cagayan, na binaha tayo and hindi natin kinaya na mag-recover. That's why humingi na tayo sa national government for help. Okay, dahil kay Lenny Robredo. Okay, hindi ko siya pinopromote pero sinasabi ko lang. Okay, dahil kay Lenny Robredo, tinulungan niya tayo. So, isa siya sa mga national government officials na nakatulong din sa atin. And then, nagkaroon na ng ripple effect. Nalaman na din ng other provinces. Okay, and then, tumulong na din sila. At naka-reach na rin tayo international for that relief operations. Okay? So, yun yung sinasabi natin na hindi natin kayang kapag nagkaroon tayo ng disaster, we cannot manage it through normal means kasi we need other or outside or extraordinary help from national government and NGOs. Ayan, next. Now, the following also characterize disasters. Okay? So, disaster knows no political boundary. Meaning to say, disasters don't care about the capacity of the community to be affected by them, or like the distractions or disruptions that they do. Wala silang pake. Syempre, alamin pa ba yun ng disaster? Okay? So, walang pakialam. They just do the devastations, and disaster doesn't care about anything with that community. Okay? So, disaster knows no boundary. Okay? Next, disaster requires restructured and new responding organizations. Why? Kasi nga, kapag nagkaroon ng disaster, syempre may mga may mga nagsusulput ng mga responding team in order to help the community. And then, may nangyayari ding restructuring kasi they plan for a better way to or effective way to help the community affected. Okay, lalo na doon sa government and other agencies that are responding to the needs of the community. Okay? Next is creates new tasks and requires more people as disaster responders. It creates new tasks kasi syempre magkakaroon ng disruption sa normal functioning ng community. So maggagawa na naman ng parang mapipilitan kang gumawa ng ibang task, hindi yung normal routines mo. Mapipilitan kang for example, you are used to do a job like this, pero ngayon kailangan mong maghanap pa ng ibang jobs para lang makarecover ka doon sa or kayo ng family mo doon sa disaster. Ayan, it also requires more people as disaster responders, lalo na dito sa mga relief operations like yung nangyaring pagbaha dito sa Cagayan. So maraming na-create na new tasks, maraming tumulong, maraming mga taong naging responding team to help other people. Okay? Ayan, it also renders inutile routine emergency response equipment and facilities. Okay, dito sa rendering of inutile routine emergency response equipment and facilities, okay, makikita natin dito kung yung mga useless na emergency routines, okay, parang masisira, mag-give up yung mga inutile or yung mga useless na routines dahil sa nangyari, pati yung mga facilities. Tama ba? Ano ba yan? Tama ba to? Ayan, renders inutile routine emergency response equipment and facilities. So, kapag yung ibig sabihin nito is renders inutile routine, ayan, ibig sabihin, we will give up yung mga useless na anong tawag mo ito, na facilities, mga equipment, okay, na hindi talaga nakakatulong during responding or helping sa disaster. Okay? So, yon. Next, worsens confusion in understanding roles of peoples and organizations. So, isang characteristic ng disaster, kapag nagkaroon ng disaster, it worsens, okay, confusion. Kasi, nagkaroon na ng dysfunction sa community. So, hindi mo na alam kung ano yung normal role mo dapat doon. Dahil nga sa severe destruction sa functioning ng community, magkakaroon ng confusion kung tutulong ba ako, or ito ba dapat kong gawin, or ano ba dapat kong gawin ngayon, kasi sa dami ng mga nangyayari. Okay? Next, kapag nagkaroon ng disaster, it exposes lack of disaster planning, response, and coordination. Inexperienced disaster organization often fail to see what their proper roles are. So, isang characteristic is, if the disaster have occurred on that certain area, okay, it exposes the disaster readiness and risk reduction management plan of that area. Okay? If they really are prepared, or kung may nangyayari bang anong tawag mo dito, planning before a disaster, makikita yun lahat kapag meron ng disaster. Okay? So kapag yung organization is inexperienced, inefficient, okay? So mahirapan sila, there will be difficulty in coordinating, there will be difficulty in responding to the needs of the community. Okay? So, yun ang other characteristics, okay? Other characteristics of disasters. Next, we have impacts of disasters. So, number 1 is medical effects. Yan. The medical effects of disaster include traumatic injuries, emotional stress, epidemic diseases, and indigenous diseases. Okay, una, we have traumatic injuries. Siyempre, kapag nagkaroon ng disaster, hindi natin maiiwasan, lalo na kapag hindi tayo prepared, or kapag talagang very strong yung disaster na nangyari, may mga traumatic injuries. Like, for example, ano tawag mo ito? Pwede kang mabalian ng buto, pwede kang masaktan, aray. Or like, may mga pwede ring matamaan sa ulo kapag may nahulog ng mga bagay-bagay, mga debris. So, it can cause traumatic injuries. Next, emotional stress. Okay, more on psychological aspect because you were traumatized with what happened. Okay? Okay, for example, isang injury na nangyari sa'yo, yun nga, nabulag ka because of a certain disaster. Tapos, syempre, isipin mo sa sarili mo, how are you going to live again? Mawawalan ka na ng pag-asa, mas may stress ka, you will be emotional unstable, so yun yun. Next, epidemic diseases. Okay? May widespread ng diseases na mangyayari. Okay? Kapag isang epekto isang medical effect under disaster, yung widespread of epidemic and indigenous diseases. Okay? For example, katulad nung nangyari sa pagbaha dito sa Cagayan. Okay? Ang nangyari is there are relief operations na tumulong doon sa mga affected areas. And still, kahit tumutulong yung mga tao doon, okay, we are still under the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. So, may nangyaring pagbahang disaster, tapos still under pa rin yung area under pa rin tayo sa pandemic situation. So, during the relief operations, tumaas yung cases because nagkahawaan ng sakit, mga ganung bagay. Okay? Or pwede din na kunyari, effects ng disaster is, di ba sa isang recovering area or anong tawag mo na dito, evacuation area, okay? Tapos may isang tao doon na may severe na disease. Okay, may tendency na magkahawaan sila. Okay? Magkahawaan sila doon na yung mga tao na nandun. Pwede din na kunyari sa pagbaha tapos may sugat ka, okay, yung leptospirosis. Okay? Pwede magkaroon ng infection doon. So, that is also an example of medical effect. Okay? So, yon. Next, ayan. Kung makikita natin dito, ayan, merong traumatic injury dun sa bata. Okay? So, yung bata, that baby, okay, well, wala pa siyang kamuwang sa buhay, pero may injury na siya. So, it will cause trauma on the health of the child, ganon. Okay? So, yan. At pwede din na baka may sakit na mahawa lang itong batang to or yung baby, okay? So, that is also an example of medical effect. Next, we have damage to critical facilities. So, widespread disasters can destroy or damage facilities that may be critical not only in maintaining a safe environment and public order, but also in responding to the disaster. Okay? So, yung disaster, syempre, sabi nga natin, pwede siyang manira or pwede magkaroon ng widespread property destruction. Okay? So, yung mga facilities masisira, like for example, the hospitals, that is one of the critical facilities that provides healthcare services. At kapag yun naapektuhan, nasira and all, it will be difficult for the people to recover. Okay? Kasi nga, it is a critical facility na tumutulong sa mga injured people na after the disaster. So that is an example of a critical damage to critical facilities. Ayan. Among these are communication installations, like for example, yung communication yung sa mga towers or like yung mga cables, communication cables and all, nawawalan ng signal. Ayan, isa yung damage to critical facility. Electrical generating and transmission facilities, like for example, nagkaroon ng brownout, okay, dahil may nangyaring ganito, may nasirang poste ng kuryente and all. Ayan, so isa yung factor. Ayan, sabi ko nga, hospitals, water facilities, syempre yung yung kailangan natin ng purified drinking water. Syempre, kailangan natin one of our necessities. Tapos, pag yung water facility after the disaster nasira, may mga, yung lumalabas na tubig is not, distilled, hindi siya malinis, and also, it can cause more, more other, anong tawag nito? More other impacts. Okay? And then, other public and private buildings. Okay? Like school, mga ganung bagay. Okay? So, damage to critical facilities. Ayan. Ito, isang example to ng hospital. And it is because of a hurricane that have occurred on that certain area. Okay, hurricane I guess or tornado, mga ganung bagay. And then nasira yung hospital. So it will be difficult for the people that were affected by that disaster to recover because the health services of that hospital will not, or the facility will cannot accommodate the people. Okay, hindi na nila may yung function nila as a hospital, may hirapan na silang i-fulfill dahil sa nangyari, dahil nasira yung facilities ng hospital. Okay, so yon. Next. Ayan, disruption of transportation. Ayan, during initial stages of a disaster, almost all surface means of transportation within a community are disrupted by broken bridges and roads and streets that are rendered impassable by landslides or floods. The restricted mobility of vehicles makes rescue and other emergency operations doubly difficult. Okay, syempre isang effect or isang impact ng disaster talaga is itong disruption in transportation. Because for example, yung disaster na flooding, it will be difficult for vehicles to transport or to it will be difficult to travel. Okay? Kasi nga, yung mga roads, okay, maybe destroyed or impassable talaga. Like yung nangyari dito sa atin. Okay? Perfect example talaga yung nangyari na pagbaha. Okay? Kasi some roads, some streets are impassable. And it's difficult for organizations, okay, to do their relief operations because of that disruption in the transportation. Okay? Ang mga nakaka-transport lang doon or nakakadaan lang doon is bigger trucks, and not all organizations have that kind of mobile, okay? So, or vehicle. So, syempre, mahihirapan na magkaroon ng emergency operations doon. Okay? So, yun. Ayan. So, kung makikita natin dito sa picture na to, there is a destroyed bridge because of running or flash floods na nangyari. Okay? So, mahihirapan na yung mga tao dito to move from one place to another. Okay? And then, yung relief operations. Okay? Although, okay pa yung isang bridge, passable, but still, yung isang part, okay, mahihirapan na yung mabilisang transport ng mga relief ops, ng mga relief goods, ganyan. So, it will be difficult for them. At, mahihirapan na bumalik sa normal functioning niya na dalawa yung roads yung dinadaanan nila. Okay? Next, we have economic impact. So, as a result of the destruction and damage to critical facilities, especially to transportation and communication facilities, disasters disrupt economies as normal business operations and other economic activities are curtailed. People must also leave their jobs and devote their time to disaster-related activities such as search and rescue or to caring for survivors. Syempre, pag nagkaroon na ng destruction and damage to critical facilities, okay, the normal functioning of the community is altered, and so may tendency na yung mga businesses, okay, yung mga businesses, yung mga ano ba dito? Mga businesses, mga other economic or okay, next we have number 4, economic impact. So, as a result of the destruction and damage to critical facilities, especially to transportation and communications facilities, disasters disrupt economies as normal businesses, operations, and other economic activities are curtailed. Okay? So people are also or must also leave their jobs and devote their time to disaster-related activities such as search and rescue or to caring for survivors. Ayan. So, syempre, pag nagkaroon na ng disaster, okay, may disruption na nangyari, nasira yung properties, nasira yung mga facilities, okay? Yung mga business, okay, hindi na sila babalik sa normal operations nila kasi their employees might be might be more focused on recovering for themselves, okay? Hindi nila isipin yung trabaho muna, syempre, sarili muna because of the event na nangyari, okay? So, yung mga business firms, yung mga industries, mga factories and all, yung mga workers nila may tendency na they will devote themselves to recover first from the disaster. Okay, hindi mo na nila isipin yung jobs. And so, may tendency doon na bumaba yung economy. Okay? So, yun. Next. Ayan, for example, dito, isa tong report ng Asian Development Outlook, okay, from the Asian Development Bank. Okay, so, ito yung report, GDP report nito for during the pandemic. Okay, during our situation in pandemic. Okay, kung makikita natin yung GDP ng Philippines noong 2018 is 6.2%, tapos bumaba siya ng 2019, 5.9%. And then, because of the current, nung unang impact ng pandemic, okay, yung COVID-19 dito sa Philippines noong 2020, ang laki ng binaba niya from 5.9 to 2.0%. And then, ngayon tinatry na pataasin ang GDP natin this year. Okay, so we are trying our best to go back to the normal functioning of our community para tumaas na yung GDP natin and all. So yan yung example ng economic impact, okay? Makikita natin yung biglang pagbaba ng GDP ng Philippines. Ayan. So, last is this is not the last one. So, next is global environmental change. Ayan. So, there are increasing evidence of global climatic change brought about by both human activity and disasters. Although, the long-range consequences are hard to predict, more severe cyclonic storms and increase in both flooding and drought and trend towards desertification cannot be ruled out. Okay, dahil sa nangyayaring mga disasters, ang dami na rin siyang global effects. Okay? So, makikita natin dito that the changes could result in a wide range of more hazards such as wildfire and mudslides, reduced productivity in the oceans, and weakened immune systems of people and animal. We can have it in a diagram. Ayan. The climate change can cause, atmospheric or ozone depletion. Ayan, meron ding desertification and land degradation, and then freshwater decline and biodiversity loss and ecosystem function. Okay, ngayon makikita natin dito na for example, yung dahil sa climate change, may mga areas, okay, may mga areas na makaka-experience ng drought, and so it can lead to desertification. Okay? So dahil sa sobrang init, okay, na-experience ng globe, ayan, may mga desertification and land degradation na nangyayari, kino-convert yung land, ayan, na-degrade yung quality ng land. Okay? Isang impact siya isa siyang isang example na nagagawa ng climate change. Ayan, isa pa, stratospheric or ozone depletion. Okay? So, itong ozone depletion dahil na din sa human activity na ini-increase yung carbon dioxide. Okay? So, it may cause ozone depletion. at nagre-resulta siya sa pag-init ng globe. Next, another climate change, another impact ng climate change is biodiversity loss. The animals and plants that were used to that kind of environmental condition. Okay? Kunyari, nasanay sila sa tropical na ganito or ganitong certain condition ng environment nila. Tapos biglang nabago because of climate change. So, mawawala sila. Maghahanap sila ng way to survive or pwede silang mamatay. Okay? Like for example, yung mga polar bears sa North Pole. Dahil na din sa pag-decrease or pag melt ng ice doon, they are searching for ways in order to survive. Ayan. So, may tendency din na dahil sa habitat loss na din, okay, pwedeng maging endanger or extinct yung mga polar bears. As well as ecosystem function, I should say. Ecosystem function, so, yung, kunyari may namatay na doon sa isang ecosystem and it's part of the it's part of the food chain. Okay, so nawala siya, masisira yung food chain, so may dysfunction na sa ecosystem. Okay, mga ganung bagay. Next, climate change is also may affect or may result to freshwater decline. Bakit? Kasi na dudumihan because of human activity, na dudumihan yung mga freshwater resources natin. And so, yung mga resources natin or yung mga fishes doon, yung mga food source natin on that ecosystem may decline. Okay? Yung mga living organisms doon, pwede silang mamatay. Okay? And all of these things, lahat to, it will always affect human health. Okay? Makaka-apekto siya sa human health. Okay, like yung sa ozone depletion, UV exposure, iitim ka na, magkakaroon ka pa ng skin diseases, mga ganung bagay. Desertification and land degradation, agro-ecosystem productivity, sa agriculture, okay? Kunyari ang source of income mo agriculture, so magkakaroon siya ng lack of food. So, pwede din siya mag-lead to human health. Ayan, next, decline dito sa may biodiversity and ecosystem function, decline in several ecosystem services. Okay, yun ngayon sa food chain. So, pwede ma-alter doon, mahihirapan ka na maghanap ng other food source, mga ganun bagay. And then, ito sa may freshwater decline, ayan, freshwater decline, water quantity and safety. Syempre, hindi ka na sure kung malinis pa ba yung iniinom mo na tubig. Ayan, so, yun yung effect ng climate change sa human health. Okay? So, yun. Next is social and political impact. Okay, this will be the last impact of disasters. Okay? So, as a large segment of the population in developing countries consists the poor, who are the most vulnerable whenever a disaster strikes, these countries are the most affected. The poor are the most prone to disasters like earthquake and typhoons because of the structures they live in, which are unreinforced or poorly built. Okay? Sinasabi ulit dito, kapag developing countries, mostly consist of poor. Okay? Mostly are mga tao nila or majority ng population are poor. And so, they are the most vulnerable. Bakit? Because, okay, yung lifestyle nila, it will be difficult for them to look for resources. Kasi nga sa lifestyle or sa life status nila. Okay? Wala naman silang pera pambili ng ganitong mga gamit, ng mga ganitong resources. And so, they are the most vulnerable kapag merong disaster. Okay? Yan. Other than that, yung mga structures they live in, okay, those are unreinforced or poorly built. Syempre, because of their limited resources na din, okay, wala silang pambili ng mga gamit to have a better home or a better house. Wala silang gamit or wala silang pera pambili for food and all. Yung mga kinakain nila, limited lang. Okay, mas madali silang apektuhan mas madali silang apektuhan ng diseases, mga ganung bagay. So, they are the most vulnerable. Okay? They are the most vulnerable. Next. Ayan, they are also often located in marginal lands. When disasters happen, social and political inequities are usually exposed, which may lead to major political and social changes. Okay? Like for example, social and political inequities. Okay. Katulad ngayon sa pandemic na experience natin, COVID-19, 'di ba? The dati yung mga wala pa tayong swab test, wala pa tayong mga testing kits and all. Tapos in terms of social status, yung mga nagpapa swab test muna is yung mga mayayaman or yung mga may kaya na makapagpa-swab test, unlike those that are less fortunate. Okay, so sila yung mga nauna, yung mga may kayang magpa-swab, and then even the politicians, they were the first one to do the swab testing, and hindi prioritize yung mga talagang nangangailangan. Okay, makikita dito yung inequities. Okay, makikita natin dito. Okay, may expose doon sa social and political inequities, may expose, makikita ng mga tao kung sino talaga yung mga may kaya, kung sino yung mabilis lang makapag-cope, unlike pati sa political aspect, yung sa nangyaring swab testing, mas inuna talaga yung mga politicians kaysa dun sa mga talagang nangangailangan. So makikita dito, so kailangan ng mga changes. Okay, so yun. Ayan. So, dito makikita natin, social impact niya is yung nangyari dito sa pandemic. Lahat tayo naka-face mask. We need to observe social distancing, mga ganung bagay. Less physical contact. So, isang social impact yun. Okay? So, that's all for today. Ayan, maraming salamat sa pakikinig dito. I hope na may natutunan kayo dito sa video lecture na ginawa ko on disaster readiness and risk reduction. Okay? So, for questions and other clarifications, you can ask your subject teachers. Okay? And then, pwede rin kayong mag-ask through LMS para in case na may hindi ka naintindihan, you can just ask them for clarifications. Okay? So, thank you for listening, and I hope na marami tayo natutunan for today. Okay? That's all for today for the Disaster Readiness and Risk Reduction Management session. Thank you very much, and God bless.